We are back with Ed Komarek, my apologies. Ed Komarek. Fire in Nature, a fire activist's guide. And we were talking about the fire suppression culture, which is largely responsible for the wildfires that we are seeing throughout the world today. It's not directed energy weapons, folks. It's not climate change. It's fire suppression culture, where these frequent controlled fires and fire management and using fire in a responsible way to clear out deadwood and so forth and underbrush, that's all been gotten rid of. Remember those Smokey the Bear campaigns? That's all contributing to the intensity of wildfires that we're seeing today, and it's just a matter of time before all of this latent energy in forests all over the world, and particularly here in North America, that someone decides to light the fuse that will cause such a catastrophic wildfire that the world has never seen. You could have an entire city going up. How long would it take for a large metropolitan center, once a wildfire takes hold and is uncontrollable at this point? We're seeing, a wall of fire hundreds of feet high, and it starts descending on a city. How long would it take for a major metropolitan center to go up in flames, Ed?
Not very long. That's the problem, and you might even, people can check with their local governments and whatever and see what kind of vulnerabilities they have. And you can search the internet on the cities, how vulnerable they are. And if they're vulnerable, they need to get out there and start lobbying their leaders, the political leaders and whatever, to get the money to get these prescribed fire buffers put in, and also and also fire hardened homes. Now, Jerry Brown and the legislature in California authorized $1 billion over 5 years, but that's just a drop in a bucket to do these things. And it's going to take a lot more than that. It's going to take $100 billion, probably more, over 10, 15, 20 years or even longer, to get these ecosystems back into natural balance again. And so first you've got to deal with the wildfire problem. So you got to deal with wildfire mitigation, which means you got to get the debris out of these, burn the debris out of these forests very carefully, because once you have a lot of debris, it can get away from you very quickly. And so it's not easy to burn the first time. And also you can get what we call duff fires around the base of the tree. The fire can go through cool, and you don't think you've hurt any trees, but that duff starts burning. That debris that comes from the bark falling down around the base of the tree starts burning like a fuse, and it'll girdle your trees. And a year or two later, you'll have a bunch of dead trees. So it's a very delicate process, and it takes a lot of skill to remove these huge accumulations of fuel. But it's got to be done, and it's going to be expensive, and people have to pay a lot of money for it. It's going to be a lot better to do that now than to pay later. There's going to be a lot more.
But then you're going to run headlong into the environmentalists who are saying we can't have all of these controlled fires all over North America to clear out this dead brush, because you're going to contribute to greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide and so forth. I mean, I don't know how you're going to fight these people. It's become a religion.
A lot of the problem is smoke. As people get a little smoke in the city because they're so diverse. Here down the southeast United States, it box in with smoke. People are used to it. It's no big deal. In the western United States, they get a little smoke, or they get some ashes in their swimming pool or whatever, and they get upset, and they talk to the politicians, and it makes prescribed burning very difficult. So you've got the regulatory hurdles that are in place, and you've got the environmentalists who have been propagandized just like everybody else by Smokey the Bear, too. But I think they've done studies on it, and that prescribed fires don't really add to the carbon in the atmosphere, in whatever like catastrophic fires do, and the debris that builds up. That debris is either going to rot down, which is going to put carbon in the atmosphere, or it's going to burn and fertilize the soil for new growth to come up for wildlife and plants and whatever. So these fire-adapted ecosystems need fire in order to survive, and we have degraded them to such a point that we've lost a lot of these ecosystems, and now once we get the wildfire problem under control, we've got to start rebuilding building these ecosystems, and that's going to be a difficult process because you got a lot of invasive species now. We actually put Pangea back together again, by moving plants and animals and diseases from all over the world, spreading them out, all back to to almost like a continent, supercontinent coming back together again.
Right.
And that just created a lot of trauma. For all the different species that are not as adapted to it, say, as an invasive species from China or somewhere else in the world and whatever. So we create a huge amount of environmental damage, and it's back to a culture. It's even existential because our very existence depends upon us understanding why and how nature works and to work in harmony with nature rather than to see nature as a resource to be exploited and dominated. Because nature is going to come back and bite us, and it's doing that right now with the wildfires, and it's doing it in more subtler ways in the eastern United States and whatever. So we've got to get back in touch with nature. We've got to re-educate ourselves about the importance of fire in nature. We've got to get rid of this propaganda, the Smokey the Bear propaganda that's been spent billions of dollars on these propaganda campaigns to get people to stop, to put out forest fires and whatever, and let this debris build up the way it
right.
Way it
I want to
has.
come back to a point you made earlier, which I found very intriguing. You mentioned something like, on average, 100 firefighters every year are charged with arson.
Yeah, now that's not just wildlife firefighters. That's all firefighters.
Right, but
or Wikipedia, you can look up in Wikipedia. Just look up.
What's at work there? Why is that? What's going on there? Do you have any theory as to why?
They discuss it on Wikipedia. Some of it, the firefighters are just bored. They want some excitement. Some of them want to extend the fire season a little bit so they can work a little longer. It's just typical, human motivations. And most of the firefighters are really good folks and very capable and whatever. But just like in anything else, you got a few bad apples, and a few bad apples can cause a lot of trouble. And especially when they're skilled at putting out fires and laying fires and backfires and whatever to protect cities and stuff and whatever. They've developed all the skills to easily become a pyroterrorist. They go from becoming just arsonists to become pyroterrorists. But the ignition is not the problem again. The problem is the fuel. Once you get the fuel accumulations down, then you don't have to worry about ignitions. And ignition in a prescribed fire zone isn't going to do anything. It's not going to it's not going to climb up into the crowns of the trees and create a catastrophic wildfire. It's going to burn along the ground and be easy to put out, or it'll just go out on its own because there's nothing to burn. So if climate change is a problem, why does a wildfire when it hits a prescribed fire zone go out or fizzles? It's not because you burn the debris out under damp, cool conditions in a very careful way, so there's nothing to burn in a drought. No matter if climate change created the drought or whatever created the drought, there's nothing to burn there because you've got the fuel accumulations down.
Right.
But when the fuel accumulations are up, then maybe climate change is having an effect.
What about fires that go underground? I've heard that fires can burn underground for years and then pop up somewhere else.
You can get down in coal seams and that sort of thing, but even as prescribed, it gets people doing prescribed fire fits. There was there's some prescribed fires down here in my area where it burns in the peat under the fire line and comes up the other side 2 weeks later to start a catastrophic fire on the other side of the fire line. Peat fires will burn all summer long, like in Okefenokee Swamp, but that's important for fires to burn in Okefenokee Swamp because it burns out all the peat and whatever, and it cleans the Okefenokee Swamp up, and you have a lot of open water and everything else that's been being turned into a peat bog all gets burned out. So it's very healthy for the wildlife and whatever. Even a peat fire is very healthy in a wetland because it burns out all the debris and accumulations of peat and whatever and whatever. So fire goes back almost 500 million years, and in the Carboniferous, palm trees are very fire hardened and whatever. They've got. I've seen them where they've been almost burned, been really hot fires, almost completely through, and they're still alive.
Amazing.
And
how did you get involved? I mean, I know your father was a fire ecologist. How did you learn about all of this? This is the depth of your knowledge is remarkable.
I grew up in a fire environment. As soon as I could walk, I was out there riding on the tractor, trying to drive the tractor, sitting in my dad's lap, plowing fire lanes, and getting out and lighting fires when I could barely walk. So I developed the skills from mentoring, and this is what Native peoples do. Native peoples taught their children, and the children taught their children whatever. So it's knowledge of how to use fire as a tool. Was handed down from generation to generation, and so that's what happened to me. And you just can't get that from academia. You can't get that from classes and whatever. You've got to get out there. You got to get out there in the woods and spend a larger part of your life out there in the woods. I'm telling Birds on Plantation was our plantation. It's the nature center now. I was over it's 565 acres. I was probably over every square foot of that as a kid. Whatever I knew. Just about every tree, every little habitat, or every little micro ecosystem there. And so when I light a fire through there, got one area I want to burn hotter, I burn it with a head fire, and then I set it up where the fire backs through, or some small pines or whatever that I don't want the fire to hurt. And so very carefully created all these little micro, habitats and ecosystems and whatever. And that's how St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge is way ahead of a lot of the government agencies. They're protecting a endangered salamander that relies on fire to burn out these little peat bogs and stuff, where the salamander is almost completely wiped out because of fire suppression and whatever.
Ed, we've got to take a break, Ed. We've got to take a time out. Fire has the ability to destroy, but also create. We're going to switch gears when we come back, Ed, and move on to other matters, if you're good for that. We can explore.
I'm trying to be kind of careful where I don't get, I don't mix up fire with my other interests.
Well, I think we've kind of burned this one out. So if you're good for that, we'll talk about some other things. Ed Komarek, back with more in a moment on The Conspiracy Show. Hi, it's your old buddy Richard Serrett, host and creator of The Conspiracy Show. I have news. We're now on Patreon. Now, I've put this off as long as I can, but now I need your help, and that's why we've joined Patreon. I have a small and very dedicated team of volunteers. Maybe you've heard of them. Albert Vinzel, my story producer, and Ryan White, my live stream producer. They come in every week without fail and work for nothing because they believe in the show. And I know you do too. So, I hope you'll consider becoming a donor. A small pledge of $10, $20, or maybe even $50 a month will help us out enormously. I would be eternally grateful. My pledge to you is that we'll continue to follow the truth wherever it leads. Please check out our page at patreon.com/The Conspiracy Show. Again, thank you.
Fasten your seatbelt and put your tray in the upright position. You're about to leave everything you know behind on The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett from Zoomer Radio.
And we are back with Ed Komarek. And he stays with us for the full 2 hours. We have been talking about wildfires and how fire suppression has contributed to the severity of wildfires, and he's warning of a possible terrorist attack utilizing a massive wildfire. But Ed, I wanted to move on. If I know you don't like to mix the two, but we sort of left, I think, that behind, and I wanted to talk about how you say that our leaders in the world, had they not failed us back in the 40s and 50s, you sort of say that we would have this positive vision of Star Trek. It could have been our present-day reality. You talk about this in UFOs, Exopolitics, and the New World Disorder. Talk to me a little bit about what happened, do you think, in the 40s and 50s that prevented this positive vision of a Star Trek world?
Well, if you think fire, we've created a catastrophic situation with fire. Holy moly! When you get into extraterrestrial contact and the suppression of the truth involved with that, you've actually completely suppressed a culture, much like what happened in Russia, where they suppressed, separated their people from the outside world during the Soviet Union, existence and whatever. It's just hard to conceive of how devastating it's been. And before I get into it, though, let's you've got up on your website the links on the Fire book and the my other books. You can get into them through my portal website, komarek.weebly.com/, or you can go to the Fire book, and the UFO book is there, as well as the Enlightenment book. And people can easily contact me if they want to ask questions on Facebook. I'm on Facebook, and I also run the group Association of Fire Management Activists that people can join and keep up on what's going on with prescribed fire and wildfire, not just in the United States, but around the world. But as far as what happened again, as I discussed, about fire, is that in order to come up with a remedy, a doctor, you can't even get to see a doctor until you've filled out a form on your patient history, because the causes of your illness may go back in time into the history. And so, just like we've tried to talk a little bit about fire, or about the history of fire and whatever, because it's important to find a remedy and a cure by going back into history and finding the real causes, and then, develop a remedy. And the whole thing, a whole nother can of worms, is a situation involving UFOs, extraterrestrial contact, and suppression of the truth of that. And that really started in earnest. It was ongoing even before the 40s. Apparently, Germany was reverse engineering spacecraft involved with exotic propulsion systems even before World War II, and then during World War II. And they even came up with an anti-gravitic craft, apparently, but they couldn't use it because basically, in order to create anti-gravity and also electromagnetic propulsion, you have to have these really large capacitors, and you have to have a really powerful power source to power these capacitors. So they could power up their craft, send it up, but it's going to come back down in 15 or 20 minutes, because as a capacitor is discharged, they didn't have a compact enough power plant in order to power this craft. And it wasn't until the United States had compact nuclear weapons, the Navy developed compact power plants for ships and even spacecraft. They've been working on spacecraft and stuff like that. So they developed by the late 1950s. People that were involved in these classified programs of talk. So you have a really timeline all the way from when the Germans got into reverse engineering these technologies, and then all the way up to the 40s and the 50s. And by 1959, we were flying our own craft that had nuclear power plants inside. And then that was the beginning of what we call the secret space fleet that's been developing ever since. And now apparently they have carrier craft in space as well as scout ships and all these other different things, and it's all being kept from the public. And when President Trump says that we're going to have a space force or whatever, well, we've already got it. They're just trying to legitimize it.
Right.
And
this is part of controlled disclosure.
Yeah. And so because of these technologies, the problem was in the 1940s and 50s, the elite that really run the world, the financiers, like J.P. Morgan told Nikola Tesla that if I can't put a meter on it, I don't want to have nothing to do with it.
Right, because Tesla had figured out a way to transmit electricity wirelessly.
Yeah. And so in the 1950s, all this got suppressed, because it would completely revolutionize not only just energy, it would really revolutionize you wouldn't have you wouldn't have fossil fuels, so you wouldn't have the climate change problem we have and all environmental destruction, whatever, because you would have gone to a very clean, exotic energy that wouldn't have cost very much, basically just taking energy out of space to make same way some of these spacecraft are piloted and whatever. And then you wouldn't have highways and bridges and asphalt and whatever, because you would have the Jetsons kind of flying cars that were anti-gravity cars and whatever. So that's all that cement companies, asphalt companies. You wouldn't have it completely revolutionized medicine. All the pharmaceutical industry would be out. You have radiant healing and all kinds of different things that ETs use and whatnot and all this kind of stuff. So that will all be out. So right off the bat, the elite who had their people in the intelligence community when the crash at Roswell happened, and even before that, realized that they were going to lose control over this planet and control over the people if this knowledge came out, and they would lose trillions of dollars. And so they decided to suppress it so they wouldn't lose the trillions of dollars, whatever, because this is what happens is in a society, a civilization builds up on innovation, but that innovation eventually develops entrenched interests, and those entrenched interests then suppress new innovation, and that causes a decline in societies like Greece and Rome and whatever. So it's happening. We're getting a decline in society because these special interests have suppressed all this information, and if it ever does come out, it's going to be worse than a catastrophic wildfire. You're going to have a truth conflagration, because it's going to shake people up so bad, because the whole monetary system's based upon fossil fuels and cars and all these other things and whatever, and they can't possibly allow that truth to come out because it would revolutionize everything. And not only that, we would have some extraterrestrials are very advanced, ethically advanced, and we would have extraterrestrial role models. We'd see how these extraterrestrials really live. And we're going to be like people in Syria. We want to get out. We want to go to the United States. We want to go to Europe because, and so that can't be allowed to happen under the current power structure. So,
right. When was the decision, do you think, to monopolize extraterrestrial technologies made? Was it after Roswell?
It was gradual. Apparently, there were crashes. Roosevelt was, in the Roosevelt administration, they had a crash. They had some stuff in the basement of the White House, I think. But it really was Roswell was a big wake-up call, and it almost got out at Roswell. And so they really had to tighten up on security. And the reason that in Watergate they called them plumbers was because plumbers fix leaks. And so you have billions of dollars that are used to keep this stuff classified and make sure that it doesn't leak out to the public. And if it does leak out to the public, to discredit those people that are leaking it or even killing them in some extent, instance, whatever. Because trillions of dollars are involved in suppressing a technology, but trillions of dollars are involved in reverse engineering these technologies and putting them in the marketplace and in the defense industry and whatever. So it's just like everything else, just follow money. It's all about money and power over other people.
And so do the corporations and the owners of these corporations that have access to this technology, would you agree with someone like Richard Dolan who say they constitute a separate, almost a breakaway civilization?
Yeah, I very much agree with Richard Dolan on that, and he's a credible individual in the field. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that aren't credible, but Richard Dolan is a credible individual, and the stuff that he talks about, I talk about too, in my Exopolitics book. And by the way, all my books are free. People can go on the internet and read them on their cell phones or on their computer, as well as articles and whatever, because I made them free because I didn't want to write this stuff and not have people read them. And I've been very appreciative of my mentors all through my life, not only just in fire, but in existential things and in enlightenment and whatever. And so while I was still capable, I wanted to put what I knew in these three areas that I was very knowledgeable of and make it available to the public, because I kind of feel like we're the fruit flies of the galaxy. And if you're the fruit flies of the galaxy, you can mutate pretty fast, but it's imperative that you be able to transfer good quality information to the young all the time to be able to build your civilization up to the point where you have 1,000-year lifespans like some of these extraterrestrial humans have. And so Paul Hellyer is another person, the defense minister in Canada,
yes,
has talks about there's a number of different extraterrestrial races, and he knows about the tall whites and others and whatever. But like this Lewis that came out with these gun camera photos around the Nimitz, and it's all come out, here in the last couple of years or whatever. He says the people that know what's going on can't talk, and the people that don't know are free to just clutter up and trash the whole subject, and that just fits right into the cover up because people are unable to discriminate. They don't have the scientific or the intelligence gathering knowledge. I studied intelligence gathering, CIA intelligence gathering, and other intelligence agencies. Basically, you gather as much evidence as you can, and you compile it, and then you analyze it and look for patterns, especially between different isolated individuals and whatever. So I came to my understanding of extraterrestrial contact and all the different extraterrestrials that are interacting with us here on Earth or whatever, from like I'm trying to think, Albert whatever, who compiled 15 to 20,000 humanoid cases that go all the way back into the late 1800s even. And if you take that's just ordinary people and farmers and stuff that ran into a craft that was sampling some soil or sampling water down about a creek or something like that, there's no story there. They just encountered these extraterrestrial people, and quite a few of them are human. And you take all those and you compile all those thousands of cases, and you can get a pretty good idea of what's going on in a broad sense. But as far as the detail about the cultures of the different extraterrestrial types, you can't get that. The only one I'm really confident about is Charles Hall and the tall whites. The other ones I'm fairly wary about, because usually what happens, what a scammer does is he starts building a story. It's just storytelling, and he draws the people to him and whatever, as he can concoct a story, and he makes it dramatic and whatever, and it goes on and on and on, and whatever, in order to manipulate and control people, either for money or for fame,
right,
or
but
whatever.
Let me just stop it. Let me just jump in here, Ed, for a second. Let me just jump in here. And you talk about sort of this spiritually enlightened race of aliens, but what evidence is there that they are ethical? At least the races of aliens that are interacting with us, because surely they must have struck some sort of a treaty or a technological transfer agreement with these elites. So that it's certainly not coming down into to the public realm. We don't have access to this technology. Yeah. So what leads you to believe these alien races are ethical if they are striking these agreements?
Okay, remember, it's very complex. You have some extraterrestrials like the Greys that are involved in these secret agreements and whatever, that basically don't think much of our human rights. They think of us. One time I looked up at the sky and I asked, when I was a young man, I asked, who are you? And I didn't like the answer that came down. It says, we are to you as you are to your garden. That tells you a lot. That's the Greys. But the Greys aren't the only ones that are here. And so you've got to understand that there are bukus of planetary systems, and life is evolving on all these planetary systems all over the universe. And some of them are coming here, and some of them, there's certain structures of nature. You start off with single-cell organisms, you develop sponges, you develop jellyfish, you develop fishes, you develop amphibians, you develop reptiles, you develop mammals, and whatever. But if that gets interrupted, like with an asteroid, if that asteroid hadn't hit, instead of us being here as mammals, we would probably have an intelligent species of reptiles that would be evolving off of this planet. And so you've got you've got insects that are evolving off of other planets that kind of look like praying mantises that may control some of the greys or whatever. They're kind of insectoids, and whatever. And you've got a whole variety of different kinds of humans and humanoids, which means that the human genetic material must be all over the place, all over the galaxy.
All right, Ed, hold on. We'll take another time out.
Okay.
UFOs, exopolitics, and the New World Disorder. Ed Komarek with us here on The Conspiracy Show. We'll be right back. Hey, if you love rock and roll and you love mysteries, you're going to enjoy my podcast, The Rock and Roll Twilight Zone with Richard Serrett. New episodes drop every Wednesday at midnight, 12 a.m. Eastern. It's part of the Jericho Network, as in Chris Jericho, the wrestler from WWE. Check it out, The Rock and Roll Twilight Zone with Richard Serrett. It's now available on Spotify. You can also access it through my website, strangeplanet.ca. The Rock and Roll Twilight Zone with Richard Serrett.
This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett from Zoomer Radio.
We are back with Ed Komarek, UFOs, exopolitics, and the New World Disorder. He is quite the Renaissance man. What are your thoughts on Tom DeLonge and the Academy to the Stars and their work in disclosure?
They're credible, and they're trying to release information, but they're getting really frustrated because the classified world will only leak out so much through them, and so basically it's just a drip situation, and from what I've seen, they're being frustrated in their ability to get a lot of this truth out, and it's just the superficial truth. It's about the gun camera footage and all that kind of stuff. It's not about the alliances and the treaties and whatnot. It's really not that difficult if you think about it. For instance, take a country like Syria that's involved in the civil war. We just can't waltz into Syria because of the Russians, and Russia just can't waltz in, and we're going to undermine what they're doing. So if a country is unstable and weak internally, it sets itself up for superpower interventions, and which makes everything even worse because you don't just have a civil war going on in your country amongst your own people. You've got all these other actors from outside getting involved because some are making claims to this turf and some are making claims to that turf. So we're kind of the existential situation we're in, or the exopolitical situation we're in, is just like a small third world country surrounded by superpowers trying to maintain its own integrity and not be overwhelmed and caught up in the extraterrestrial conflicts that are mostly covert because the extraterrestrials are really advanced, and so they're really subtle, so they just can't waltz in and take over this world. They have to undermine it covertly, and then the others on the other sides have to try to support this, and that gets into some of the stuff that came out recently by a guy who said he worked designing some of the craft in the secret space program and all that kind of stuff and whatever. So whenever one superpower makes a move, the other superpowers are going to make a move to counter it. So we're just caught in the middle, just like a small country surrounded by superpowers.
Right.
And there are rules about what you can do and what you can't do that the superpowers have agreed amongst themselves. We have certain agreements with Russia that we won't go too far, and where Russia doesn't go too far in Syria. And so there's a juxtaposition. So the superpowers all have these rules, and that's kind of what the extraterrestrial situation is. The extraterrestrial superpowers have rules. They have some predator species can move in and try to take over, but then other ones will counter that. But it's all according to a set of understood rules or whatever, just like we have in international politics.
Is there a Majestic 12? Is it real?
What?
Majestic 12, this group that is...
Yes, I believe so. I've studied a lot of cases. I've talked to people that even had connections to MJ12. That's one thing, you can gather all this information, on the internet and in the media and whatever, and try to make sense of it all by sorting through it all to look for patterns, but it really helps as you get involved yourself. So I got involved in some of my own encounter cases that happened here locally because I got there was a lot of activity going on, and I got on the in articles in the paper and stuff like that. So people would call me, and I was feeling there's like a couple of UFO sightings on the average probably every week here. And I got in the middle of some encounter cases that involved extraterrestrial humans, short, stocky ones, and then the typical Nordic types and whatever. They were studying some of the pesticide runoffs, the ecological damage that was going on in my area here and whatever. There's a tremendous amount of scientific work being done by these extraterrestrials, amongst other things and whatever. They're just not, like the Greys, manipulating and trying to get control over this planet, for themselves and, and manipulating our elites to do that. There's other extraterrestrials here too. And so, like I say, there's agreements amongst the superpowers as to how Earth can be persuaded or managed, and no one superpower can take over the planet. And so we're kind of left in the kind of stasis, which is kind of good for us because it gives us, we have some free will in this process, just like the people in Switzerland, has kind of like developed a porcupine strategy of defense and whatever, and not get involved in the wars that were going on around them in Europe and whatever and whatnot. Then they've done fairly well, whereas Syria and Venezuela and other countries that are internally weak or whatever are subject to superpower manipulations and whatever, according to the different agendas of the different superpowers.
Right. We're going to head into a break here in a moment, but I'll ask you this, and then we can sort it out on the other side, and that has to do with the alien abduction phenomenon and whether that is sort of a false psychological screen that has been created in order to sort of create fear about extraterrestrials, or is that one of the more nefarious alien civilizations that is responsible for that? What is your take on the abduction phenomenon?
Well, one way to keep things secret is to instill fear in the military, is to abduct people, mutilate them, and drop them on top of people's houses, which seems to have been done, which causes the military to circle the wagons. So that's one of the reasons of the cover-up to begin with, had been instigated by some of these unethical types, or I like to call them just predatory extraterrestrials. You have predatory extraterrestrials, you have some are just kind of in between, and then you have some really advanced ethical types here. So it really gives us people here on Earth a choice. And if we're going to be uncivil to each other and kill and murder each other and whatnot, we're going to fall in and probably be dominated and taken over by the predatory types, like the Greys and the Manus types and whatever. If we treat each other better and we love each other and care for each other and whatever and become more altruistic, then we'll gravitate to the more advanced extraterrestrial races, and we'll have a really positive future. And we won't end up being enslaved by another extraterrestrial culture. We'll be able to maintain our independence and be able to evolve, in a Star Trek kind of universe.
All right, Ed, stay put. We'll come back. One more segment with Ed Komarek, UFOs, Exopolitics, and the New World Disorder. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show right after this. Hey, can't get enough of conspiracy and paranormal talk? Well, you don't have to wait an entire week to listen to me on the radio. I have a podcast called Conspiracy Unlimited, and it drops 3 days a week. Brand new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Conspiracy Unlimited. You can check it out and listen and subscribe at conspiracyunlimitedpodcast.com. conspiracyunlimitedpodcast.com. But it's available everywhere you get your favorite podcasts. You can also access it through my website, strangeplanet.ca. Conspiracy Unlimited. Don't miss it.
The Conspiracy Show with Richard Sarrett from Zoomer Radio.
Welcome back. Ed Komarek remains with us for a few moments yet. Longtime UFO ET investigator and activist. Has been involved in the field for 4 decades. And for the past several years, Ed has written over 200 exopolitical essays on exopolitics, published to his blog and in the internet press. And his book is UFOs, Exopolitics, and the New World Disorder. I want to ask you about another phenomenon, and that is the cattle mutilation, which some claim, again, is kind of a, fake news, basically. And again, this is designed to sort of demonize extraterrestrials. What is your thought on the cattle mutilation?
Well, there's actually human mutilations too, but that's been suppressed a lot. And some of it is just to instill fear. You know, if you instill fear in a population, they're easy to control. And so that just boils down to, and also they're getting certain things from material, genetic material and that kind of stuff from cattle and whatever and whatnot. But there's just so many mutilations, it's unbelievable how many there are, and they're just like clouds have been just dropped from the sky. There's no tracks around. No, you know, they've been surgically very like laser cuts, and so that's all ties in with the Greys and their agenda and whatever. But like I was getting to it, it's basically existential, and that's where you get into my third book, which is the Enlightenment, the long hard road to enlightenment. Is that everything we say, everything we do, everything we think affects our who we are and what we become. And we are being offered a choice, and the battle lines run right through us. And it's a battle, just like the military says, for the hearts and minds of the people of planet Earth. But it's a covert battle, and it's along certain rules, and they have certain rules about how it's done. But there's a battle for the hearts and minds of the Earth. And every time we think badly of another person, and any time we prey on somebody else or hurt somebody else, or we do damage to nature, as well as, to ourselves and whatever, we move a little farther from our optimal evolutionary path, and maybe more pain and suffering is necessary. The one thing I've come up recently is suffering is the default driver of evolution. That if you don't, you're being presented with lessons, and if you don't learn those lessons and pass those tests, you're going to continue to suffer. And it happens for children. The child hits his head on the corner of the table, he hurts himself, he learns not to hit his head on the corner of the table and whatever. So this way it gets into the enlightenment thing, and then you get into 1 out of 10 people have had a UFO experience, but 1 out of 10 people have had a near-death experience. So, and
are they connected?
Not quite as many had reincarnational experiences and whatever.
Are they connected, Ed? Are they connected? A near-death experience and a UFO experience?
It's all connected. Everything is connected. And what we have to understand is every word we speak, every thought that we think, moves us either into a more enlightened state or into a more degraded state. So we have free will, in a way, but it's the way our virtual reality is set up, or universe, or whatever it is. It may even be virtual, maybe a simulation. It's basically based on the carrot and stick. You either learn your lessons, and become a truly happy person and satisfied person, or you don't. You keep hitting your head against the wall and hurting yourself until you do learn. And what I've learned in my life is I don't try not to judge anybody. I have to protect myself from predators, but I don't prejudge them, because everybody is learning their own lessons at their own time and their own place, and that's fine. And suffering is going to be the driver, until people become conscious, because suffering, is being driven by our unconscious a lot of times until we become conscious and we move forward and we learn our lessons. Even the amoeba, if it moves in the wrong direction, it gets eaten or it gets hurt by something else or whatever. So it's learning. So even the single-cell organisms are learning, and they make mistakes and they pay for it either with suffering or death. And it's the same way for us. And so we have to align ourselves with the more advanced extraterrestrial races, but also these races that it goes beyond extraterrestrials. It becomes completely existential, and whatever, and be mentored by the more advanced beings rather than fall into the traps by the more predatory tribes and end up being consumed and enslaved.
Ed, are you a contactee?
No, but I've known a lot of maybe. I've known a lot of contact people. People have had contact not just with the Greys. There was one lady who was having problems with, blood on the sheets and the abduction phenomenon and stuff and whatever. And that night, when I interviewed her the first time, that night, I was woke up in the middle of the night with this kind of a buzzing like bees, and they were like angry bees, and they said, "Stay out of it. It's none of your business." And I said, "Whoa." And I better back out of that relationship a little bit. And I just said, you guys are going to have to take care of this because this is beyond me. And I've kind of backed out for a while, and I met her later on, and she was starting to have contact with more advanced human beings and whatever, and she was a lot happier, and she had freed herself from that to a certain degree. So I had that kind of encounter, and then one I told you about, that we are as you are to your garden, when I was a young man, and then I got involved in cases here and involved other extraterrestrials where my television would turn on in the middle of the night, and I'd never seen this show, The Luck of the Irish, and these little people come out of the side of the mountainside on horseback, whatever, and somebody just turned my television on in the middle of the night right to that exact thing. It just couldn't have been coincidence, involved in whatever. So they're interacting. More advanced extraterrestrials are interacting with me, but it's basically telepathic, I think, and it's to a degree that it keeps me safe, and doesn't, if I was having direct contact with more advanced ethical races and whatever, it would probably put me in jeopardy by some of the elites and the less ethical extraterrestrials that are, manipulating the elites.
So the particular race of alien that one interacts with is directly tied to one's own level of spiritual development. If you're kind of in a low state of spiritual development, you're going to be interacting with greys and the praying mantis or insectoid type aliens. And if you're a higher spiritually developed, then you'll interact with the tall ones or the Nordics. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I've actually seen that happen to people. It's a consciousness thing, and in my book, The Long Hard Road to Enlightenment, which again you can read on your cell phone or on the computer or whatever, I get into that.
All right. So, who is responsible, or what race of alien is responsible for these unidentified submersible objects that people are seeing coming out from various bodies of water? Who's piloting those craft?
Yeah, many different races. Like when we go to the moon, we're going to have underground bases on the moon. Russians are going to have underground bases. The Chinese are going to have underground bases on the moon, whatever. So depending on what the extraterrestrials are interested in here, some of it's probably purely scientific, some may be geologic, some may be, involved in natural. I was dealing with a contact person in which they were collecting plants and vegetables and stuff and whatever, and they even brought him a fruit that tastes from another planet and whatever. And so they have just as many different. There's just as many different. You got to remember the universe is a big place, and there's some beings that are just coming through here, and once in a while. There's some that are frequent here, some are here almost a lot of time that have bases. If you're going to be here a lot, you're going to probably have a base. If not, you can just operate out of your mothership, in space or whatever. But if you're going to be active here for whatever your interests are, you're going to have a base, and the best place to have a base is way down deep into the bedrock or down the underground, down the bottom of the oceans and whatever, so that you don't affect the indigenous populations any more than you have to.
Do you have any thoughts on whether or not the President of the United States has the power to disclose?
The President, no. The President doesn't have the power. It's all locked up in the corporations and the corporate lawyers. There was this general that I think he talked to Stephen Greer or whatever, and leaked some information, and he had this meeting, and it was these corporate lawyers, and they wanted to know where he got the information from and whatever. So it's locked up, and what I talked about in my Exopolitics book is a kind of a consortium of elite interests in corporations. that basically control this whole matter. They control the need to know. They control the classification system, and it's the corporate lawyers up at the top working for these corporations that determine the special access programs and the unacknowledged special access programs and all that kind of stuff. They even control MG-12. Apparently, in the Nixon administration, there was a split on MJ-12 that split between the scientific parts of MJ-12 and then the commercial parts and whatnot. And so the consortium basically controls even MJ-12 and whatever. That's I can understand.
Right. What percentage of UFO sightings are actually advanced aircraft designed and created by humans, and what percentage are actual extraterrestrial craft?
You mean Earth humans?
Yes.
Well, it didn't used to be that much, back in the Foo Fighters and 1800s and whatever, and all those sightings and stuff. It wasn't, there wasn't any. And then in the 1940s, with the Germans, and after Germany, you may have some from the Russians and whatever. So I would now probably, who knows? It could be 25% or 50% could be our military. But the thing about it is, maybe not, because you don't want to fly these kind of craft where they could crash into some populated area and expose the whole thing. So it's probably limited, to outer space or in remote areas, the more military craft, because they don't want to lose. They just lost $100 million fighter, I think you saw in the news here the other day.
Yes, the F-35. 35.
And whatever, and they cordon that whole thing off, and keep everybody from, seeing what's going on and whatnot. But if they had a saucer and it crashed in a populated area and there were reporters around and stuff, it'd be a hell of a thing to cover up. So the military's got to be careful about where they fly this, their craft and stuff. It's like that, the affair where the people got radiated. What was that, around '82? That case, I think that was probably a meltdown on a nuclear reactor inside of a craft that radiated those two ladies and a son, I think, or whatever.
Right. Well,
I forgot the name, whatever. But
Ed, it's been an absolute delight meeting you and speaking with you. I hope you'll join me again sometime. Give us the websites.
Okay, you can go to Komarek at Weebly.com / or you can go to fireinnature.weebly.com, or you can, if you need some help or whatever, you can contact me on Facebook. You can become a member of the Association of Fire Management Activists on Facebook to keep up with the fire stuff. So, or you can just do a word search on me, and some of that should come up. Or even you've got the links there on
we do
on your web page to my stuff.
We do indeed. Ed, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I appreciate it.
Ed Komarek, my thanks to Faz and Albert and Ryan. Back next week with a brand new program. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed, and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. What I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Good night.